In 1900, a British colonial governor stood in front of the most sacred object in an entire empire and said, essentially, "Great, I'll take a seat." Not "I'd like to see it." Not "fascinating artifact, may I study it?" He wanted to physically sit on it, as a chair, for himself. The problem, and it was a significant problem, is that this object wasn't a chair. It was believed to literally contain the soul of an entire nation. Somewhere between "please don't touch that" and "please don't touch that or we go to war," this governor picked war. And when every male chief in the room folded under the pressure, ready to just hand it over rather than risk a fight, one woman stood up and said, more or less, "If you won't fight, I will." Her name was Yaa Asantewaa. And yes, if you watched the last video, this is officially the second story in a row on this channel where a seating arrangement nearly started a war. At this point, it's less a coincidence and more a genre. If you're new here, this channel finds the moments in history that should be common knowledge but somehow got buried under several centuries of other people writing the textbooks. Subscribe if that's your thing. Nobody's going to ask you to sit on the floor for it. Let's talk about why this object mattered so much, because calling it a stool genuinely undersells it. And that mistranslation is basically the whole plot of this video. The Ashanti Empire, by the late 1800s, was one of the most powerful states in West Africa. Organized, wealthy from gold and trade, and politically sophisticated. And at the center of Ashanti identity was the Golden Stool, the Sika Dwa Kofi. According to Ashanti tradition, the stool didn't just represent the nation. It was believed to actually contain the soul of the Ashanti people. It was never sat on by anyone, not even the king, the Asantehene. It never touched the ground. It was brought out ceremonially, on its own throne, treated less like furniture and more like a sacred constitution you could physically point to. Imagine if the United States Constitution, the crown jewels, and a religious relic were all the same object. And you're getting close. So, quick gut check. If you were a foreign official and someone explained all of that to you, and your response was, "Cool, I'd like to sit on it," you would have to be either wildly uninformed or completely unbothered by the difference. As we're about to see, the British governor in question managed to be both. By 1900, Britain had already fought several wars against the Ashanti Empire over the preceding decades, gradually expanding colonial control over the region known as the Gold Coast. The Ashanti had resisted repeatedly, and after the most recent conflict, the reigning Asantehene, King Prempeh I, had been captured and exiled by the British. The empire was still standing, the king was gone, and the British governor at the time, Frederick Hodgson, decided this was the moment to go for the symbolic knockout punch. In March of 1900, Hodgson gathered Ashanti chiefs for a meeting in Kumasi, the Ashanti capital, and made his intentions clear. He wanted the Golden Stool, not as a museum piece, not as a gesture of respect. He wanted it produced so that he, the British governor, could sit on it, as a public demonstration that British authority now outranked Ashanti authority, symbol and all. This is, historically speaking, an extremely bold way to test whether a nation you just finished a war with still has any fight left in it. To put this in modern terms, it's a bit like a foreign official showing up after a ceasefire and asking to use your country's original founding document as a placemat, on camera, in front of everyone who just watched their king get taken away. The chiefs in the room were, understandably, terrified. Another war with Britain, so soon after the last one, seemed like a losing proposition, and several were prepared to quietly try to locate the stool and hand it over just to avoid provoking further conflict. And that's the exact moment Yaa Asantewaa decided that was not, in fact, going to be how this went. Yaa Asantewaa was the Queen Mother of Ejisu, one of the Ashanti Empire's constituent states, an important political and spiritual role in Ashanti society, not a ceremonial afterthought. Queen Mothers held real authority, including a formal voice in selecting and advising rulers. She had also personally lived through the consequences of the last war, including the exile of her own grandson, a chief who'd been taken along with King Prempeh. So when the male chiefs in that meeting started leaning toward quiet compliance, Yaa Asantewaa reportedly stood up and delivered a speech that has been retold in Ghana ever since. History doesn't preserve a verified word-for-word transcript, But the substance, recorded by multiple sources close to the event, was unmistakable. She asked the assembled chiefs, essentially, how men of Ashanti could sit back and watch their king taken and their nation's sacred symbol threatened, and declared that if the men would not fight, the women would fight in their place. It is, genuinely, one of the great, well, someone has to say it moments in colonial-era African history, a room full of powerful men deciding the safest move was surrender, and the Queen Mother deciding the safest move was actually calling that out, loudly, in front of everyone. And here's the thing, it worked. Not worked in the sense of guaranteeing victory, which we'll get to. It worked in the sense that it actually changed the room. Yaa Asantewaa didn't just give a speech and sit back down. She was named commander of the Ashanti forces for the coming conflict, an extraordinary appointment putting a woman directly in command of a military campaign against the British Empire. The Golden Stool was never handed over. Instead, in March of 1900, the Ashanti went to war to keep it hidden. This part of the story deserves to be treated with the weight it actually carries. So let's drop the jokes for a minute, because what followed was a real war, with real casualties on both sides. Ashanti forces, organized largely under Yaa Asantewaa's leadership, laid siege to the British fort in Kumasi, where Governor Hodgson and a garrison of colonial troops had taken refuge. The siege stretched on for months, cutting off supplies and trapping the British forces inside. Estimates of the numbers involved vary between sources, but this was a large-scale mobilization. Reportedly tens of thousands of Ashanti fighters took part over the course of the campaign, making it one of the most significant anti-colonial military efforts in West African history up to that point. The British eventually broke the siege by bringing in reinforcements from the coast, and the war turned in their favor by the autumn of 1900. The human cost was serious on both sides, significant casualties among Ashanti fighters and British colonial troops alike, and the war ultimately ended with British forces reasserting military control over the region. Yaa Asantewaa was captured and, along with other Ashanti leaders, exiled to the Seychelles, thousands of miles away in the Indian Ocean, about as far from Ejisu as the British colonial system could physically send her. By any conventional measure of who won the war, Britain did. Ashanti territory was formally annexed as a British colony not long after. This was not a triumphant movie-style victory. But here's where the story gets its ending, and where we're allowed to bring the humor back, because it's genuinely satisfying. Remember the entire reason this war started. Governor Hodgson wanted to sit on the Golden Stool. He never got to sit on the Golden Stool. The stool had been deliberately hidden by the Ashanti before and during the conflict, and despite British forces occupying Kumasi and formally annexing the empire, they never located it. Britain won the war and still walked away without the one object the entire war was supposedly about. So to recap, a colonial governor started a war by demanding to sit on a sacred national symbol, lost a Queen Mother's respect, triggered a massive armed uprising, won the war militarily at real human cost, and still never got the chair. If there's a single sentence that sums up the entire miscalculation of colonial arrogance in this story, it might be that one. The Golden Stool remained hidden for years afterward. It was eventually uncovered by accident in the 1920s by laborers, was stripped of some of its gold ornamentation by opportunistic thieves in that incident, which notably caused far more genuine outrage among the Ashanti than the British had ever managed to provoke by simply asking for it, and was eventually restored and formally reintegrated into Ashanti royal ceremony, where it remains a central symbol of Ashanti identity to this day. Yaa Asantewaa never returned home. She died in exile in the Seychelles in 1921, more than 2 decades after leading the last major Ashanti military campaign against British colonization. But the empire she fought for outlasted the war she lost. Ashanti identity, tradition, and the monarchy itself survived British colonization and remain a major cultural and political force within Ghana today. Ghana gained independence from Britain in 1957, the first sub-Saharan African colony to do so, and the Ashanti monarchy continues to exist within modern Ghana, with the Golden Stool still treated as its most sacred symbol. Yaa Asantewaa is remembered today as one of the most significant female military leaders in African history. Not a footnote to the men around her, but the person who, when an entire room of powerful chiefs chose caution, chose to fight instead. There's a museum dedicated to her memory in Ejisu, and her name is invoked across Ghana as a symbol of defiance against colonial rule. Governor Hodgson wanted a chair. He got a war he didn't fully win in the way he wanted. A queen mother who outmaneuvered an entire colonial administration's confidence, and a national symbol that spent the rest of his career sitting exactly nowhere near him. Meanwhile, the object at the center of it all is still there, in Ghana, still never sat on by anyone, which honestly might be the most complete rebuttal to colonial arrogance this whole story has to offer. If you're keeping score at home, that's 2 videos in a row where someone underestimated an African queen over a piece of furniture. I make no promises about the next one, but I make no denials either. Subscribe if you want more of this, and let me know in the comments who's next.